In a quiet little town called Crestwood, where everyone knew each other by name, life was usually calm and predictable. But one day, something happened that shook the entire community to its core. At the center of it all was a 16-year-old girl who had dreams bigger than anyone could have imagined. This teenager, full of potential and determination, lived with her grandmother in a small house on the edge of town. She wasn't like most kids her age. While others spent their time scrolling through social media or hanging out at the mall, she spent hours studying law online. Her dream? To become an attorney and fight for justice, especially for those who felt powerless against unfair systems. Little did she know. Her journey toward making that dream come true would begin sooner than expected, and under circumstances no one could have predicted. One sunny afternoon, she was driving her grandmother's old sedan to pick up groceries from the local store. Everything seemed normal until a police car pulled up behind her, flashing its lights. Confused but cooperative, she pulled over to the side of the road. The officer who stepped out of the car introduced himself as Officer Greg Hargrove, a man known around town for his stern demeanor and strict approach to enforcing rules. From the moment he approached the car window, things took a turn. Instead of asking routine questions about why she'd been pulled over, Hargrove started speaking to her in a tone that made her feel uneasy. He asked if the car belonged to her, clearly doubting her story when she explained it was her grandmother's vehicle. When she politely questioned why she'd been stopped, his attitude shifted. His voice turned sarcastic, almost mocking. "What do you know?" he said with a smirk. "You're just some kid who probably can't even spell lawyer." Through. Comment stung, not because it was true, but because it highlighted how people often underestimated her based on her age and appearance. Still, she tried to stay calm and answer his questions respectfully. But as the interaction went on, Hargrove grew increasingly aggressive. Without any clear reason, he accused her of resisting arrest, a charge that shocked her. Before she knew it, she was being handcuffed and placed in the back of his patrol car, tears streaming down her face. Word of the incident spread quickly. A passerby had recorded part of the ordeal on their phone, capturing the tension between the two. Within hours, the video was circulating on social media, sparking outrage among residents and civil rights activists alike. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. A young girl being treated so harshly by someone sworn to protect and serve. Her grandmother, a strong-willed woman who had raised her alone, refused to let this injustice go unnoticed. Together, they reached out to a local advocacy group that specialized in fighting cases of racial profiling and police misconduct. With their support, they decided to file a formal complaint against Hargrove. What started as a simple traffic stop had now become a legal battle, one that would eventually find its way into a courtroom. But here's the twist. Nobody, not even Hargrove himself, realized just how extraordinary this young girl truly was. Beneath her quiet exterior lay a brilliant mind capable of taking on challenges far beyond her years. She had already completed several advanced courses in law through an online university program, earning top grades despite her young age. Her IQ score of 180 put her in the same league as some of the world's brightest minds. And yet she carried herself with humility, always eager to learn more and use her knowledge to help others. As news of the upcoming court case spread, curiosity grew. How would a teenager possibly hold her own against a seasoned police officer backed by the resources of an entire department? Many doubted she could pull it off, dismissing her as too inexperienced to navigate the complexities of the legal system. Others, however, saw something special in her, a spark of brilliance combined with an unshakable sense of purpose. For her part, she didn't focus on the doubters. Instead, she channeled her energy into preparing for the trial. Every spare moment was spent poring over case files, researching laws, and practicing arguments. She wanted to make sure she was ready for whatever came her way. Deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race, age, or background. Meanwhile, Hargrove remained confident, brushing off the case as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He laughed about it with his colleagues, joking that the teenager wouldn't stand a chance in court. After all, what could a high school student possibly know about the law? His arrogance blinded him to the reality that he was about to face someone far smarter and more determined than he could have imagined. Little did he know, the courtroom showdown looming ahead would change both their lives forever. For her, it was an opportunity to prove that intelligence and courage weren't limited by age or experience. For him, it would be a humbling lesson in underestimating the power of a young mind driven by justice. And so, as the days ticked closer to the trial date, anticipation built. Friends, family, and strangers alike waited anxiously to see how this unlikely David and Goliath story would unfold. One thing was certain: whatever happened next, it would leave a lasting impact, not just on the people involved, but on the entire town of Crestwood. After the incident with the police officer, the young girl and her grandmother knew they couldn't just let things slide. They were determined to fight back, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. But taking on a case like this wasn't going to be easy, especially since the person they were up against was someone with authority and experience. It was a daunting challenge, but the girl refused to back down. Her grandmother, a woman as tough as nails and full of wisdom, decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. She reached out to an old friend, a retired civil rights attorney who had spent decades fighting for fairness in the legal system. His name was Mr. Carter, and though he was well past retirement age, his passion for justice hadn't faded one bit. When the grandmother explained the situation over the phone, Mr. Carter hesitated at first. Representing a teenager against a police officer? That sounded like a recipe for disaster. But when he met the girl in person, everything changed. From the moment she walked into his office, Mr. Carter could tell she was different. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination that most adults didn't possess. He asked her a few questions about the case, testing her knowledge and understanding of the law. To his surprise, she answered every single question confidently, citing legal terms and precedents like a seasoned professional. By the end of their meeting, Mr. Carter realized he wasn't dealing with an ordinary teenager. This girl had a mind sharper than many lawyers he'd worked with in his career. Reluctantly impressed, he agreed to mentor her and help her prepare for the trial. With Mr. Carter by her side, the girl threw herself into preparing for the case. Every day after school, she would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of books, notes, and documents. Her grandmother often brought her cups of tea, marveling at how focused and disciplined she was. Together, they pored over every detail of the incident, analyzing the officer's behavior, reviewing laws related to racial profiling, and strategizing ways to present their argument in court. It was exhausting work, but the girl didn't complain. She knew what was at stake, and she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. One of the biggest challenges they faced was finding evidence to support their claims. The officer had filed his own report, painting himself as the victim and accusing the girl of being uncooperative during the traffic stop. Without proof to counter his version of events, their case would crumble. That's when the girl remembered something important: the officer's body camera. Body cameras are supposed to provide transparency, showing exactly what happens during interactions between police officers and civilians. If they could get access to the footage, it might reveal the truth about what really happened that day. Getting hold of the footage wasn't easy. They had to file multiple requests and jump through bureaucratic hoops before finally obtaining. And when they finally watched the video, it confirmed everything the girl had said. The officer's tone was dismissive and condescending from the start. He escalated the situation unnecessarily, using language that was clearly disrespectful. The video even showed him making false accusations about her behavior, which directly contradicted his official report. It was undeniable proof that he had acted improperly, and it gave their case a major boost. As the trial date approached, tensions ran high. The girl practiced her arguments tirelessly, rehearsing them in front of Mr. Carter and her grandmother, until they were perfect. She studied famous courtroom speeches, learning how to speak with clarity and conviction. At night, she lay awake thinking about all the possible scenarios that could unfold in court. What if the judge didn't take her seriously? What if the jury sided with the officer? These doubts haunted her, but she pushed them aside, reminding herself why she was doing this in the first place. Meanwhile, the officer remained completely confident, almost cocky. He laughed off the idea that a teenager could pose any real threat to him in court. During pre-trial hearings, he openly mocked her, making jokes about her age and implying that she didn't belong in a courtroom. "This is just a waste of everyone's time," he told his colleagues. "She doesn't know the first thing about the law." His arrogance only fueled the girl's determination. Every snide comment, every dismissive remark made her more resolved to prove him wrong. The turning point came when the girl uncovered something shocking while digging deeper into the officer's past. With Mr. Carter's guidance, she discovered records of previous complaints filed against him, complaints that accused him of racial profiling and excessive force. None of these incidents had resulted in serious consequences for him, but now, they painted a troubling pattern of misconduct. Armed with this information, the girl and her team added another layer to their case, arguing that the officer's actions weren't isolated, but part of a broader history of discriminatory behavior. By the time they finished preparing, the girl felt ready, or as ready as she could be. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but she also knew she had done everything in her power to give herself the best chance of success. As she stood outside the courthouse on the morning of the trial, she took a deep breath and looked at her grandmother and Mr. Carter. "We've got this," she said softly, more to reassure herself than anything else. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Reporters filled the benches, eager to document every moment of what promised to be a dramatic showdown. Spectators whispered among themselves, some skeptical about whether a teenager could handle such a high-stakes case, others rooting for her to succeed. The girl sat quietly beside Mr. Carter, clutching a folder filled with notes and evidence. She glanced across the room at the officer, who wore a smug expression, clearly convinced that victory was already his. When the proceedings began, the girl listened intently as the judge outlined the rules of the trial. Then it was time for opening statements. Mr. Carter stood first, laying out their case in clear, measured tones. When it was her turn to speak, the girl rose slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. For a brief moment, she felt overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. But then she reminded herself of all the hard work she had put in, all the late nights spent studying and practicing. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Her voice was steady, her words precise. She recounted the events of the traffic stop, pointing out inconsistencies in the officer's story and highlighting key moments from the body camera footage. She spoke about the broader issue of racial profiling, weaving in examples from similar cases to show how systemic problems persisted. And she ended with a powerful statement, emphasizing that this case wasn't just about her. It was about holding those in positions of power accountable and ensuring that justice was served fairly, for everyone. As she sat back down, the courtroom fell silent. Even the officer, who had been smirking just moments earlier, looked uneasy. For the first time, he realized that he had underestimated his opponent, and that mistake might cost him dearly. The battle was far from over. But the girl had made one thing crystal clear. She wasn't just a teenager fighting for justice, she was a force to be reckoned with. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as the trial moved into its most critical phase. Everyone could feel it. The air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. The girl sat quietly beside Mr. Carter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of standing up in front of a judge, a jury, and a room full of people who doubted her ability to hold her own against a seasoned police officer. Still, she reminded herself of why she was here, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. When it came time for cross-examinations, the girl stepped up confidently. This was where her preparation and her sharp mind would truly shine. Her first task was questioning one of the prosecution's witnesses, another officer who had been present during the traffic stop. At first glance, he seemed unshakable, answering questions in a clipped tone that suggested he was on his colleague's side. But the girl didn't let that intimidate her. She started with simple questions, easing him into a false sense of security. "Can you describe what happened?" "When you arrived at the scene," she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. The witness hesitated for a fraction of a second, then launched into a version of events that painted the officer in a favorable light. But the girl wasn't fooled. She nodded thoughtfully, letting him finish before diving deeper. "And Wood, you say the defendant acted professionally throughout the interaction?" she continued, leaning slightly forward as if genuinely curious about his response. The witness glanced at the officer sitting across the room, clearly uncomfortable now. "Yes," he replied after a pause, though his tone lacked conviction. That's when the girl struck. "Interesting," she said softly, almost to herself before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, may I refer to Exhibit B, the body camera footage we submitted earlier?" The judge nodded, and the video began playing on a screen for everyone to see, frame by frame. She pointed out moments where the officer's behavior contradicted the witness's testimony. His dismissive tone, his exaggerated accusations, even the way he unnecessarily escalated the situation. It was all there, captured, on camera. By the time the video ended, the witness looked flustered, fumbling over his words as the girl pressed him further. "So, based on what we just saw, wouldn't you agree that the defendant's actions were far from professional?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. The witness mumbled something incoherent, unable to argue against the undeniable evidence. It was a small victory, but an important one. It set the tone for everything that followed. Next, it was the officer's turn to take the stand. Up until now, he had remained smug and self-assured, convinced that no teenager could outsmart him. As he settled into the witness chair, he exchanged a quick smirk with his lawyer, clearly expecting this part of the trial to go smoothly. But the girl had other plans. She approached the podium slowly, her eyes locked on him. For a moment they stared at each other, and she could see the flicker of unease in his expression. He still didn't believe she posed any real threat, but that was about to change. "Officer," she began, her voice calm but commanding, "you stated in your report that my client resisted arrest. Can you explain exactly how she did so?" The officer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, she became argumentative and refused to comply with my instructions," he replied, his tone defensive. The girl raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Argumentative? Refused to comply? That's interesting because the body camera footage shows her remaining calm and cooperative throughout the entire interaction." She gestured toward the screen again, replaying the relevant section of the video. "Would you care to clarify why your account differs so significantly from what we see here?" The courtroom fell silent as the officer squirmed under her gaze. He tried to deflect, claiming that the footage didn't capture the full context, but the girl wasn't having it. She countered his every excuse with facts, dismantling his defense piece by piece. Each question she asked was sharper than the last, exposing holes in his story and leaving him scrambling for answers. But the real bombshell came when she shifted gears, focusing on his history of misconduct. With Mr. Carter's help, she had uncovered records of multiple complaints filed against him over the years, all alleging racial profiling and abusive behavior. Now, armed with this information, she confronted him directly. "Isn't it true, officer, that you've been accused of racial profiling on several occasions in the past?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The officer froze, caught completely off guard. His lawyer objected immediately, but the damage was done. The jury exchanged uneasy glances, while spectators leaned forward in their seats, hanging on to every word. The girl pressed on, undeterred. "And isn't it also true that none of those complaints resulted in disciplinary action, allowing you to continue these patterns of behavior unchecked?" She paused for effect, letting the weight of her words sink in. The officer stammered, trying to deny the allegations, but his credibility was crumbling right before everyone's eyes. As the day wore on, the momentum shifted entirely in the girl's favor. Every time the prosecution tried to regain control, she was ready with a counter-argument, backed by solid evidence and razor-sharp logic. Even the judge seemed impressed, nodding approvingly as she dismantled the opposing counsel's attempts to discredit her case. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed. What had started as skepticism toward the girl had turned into admiration, even awe. When she stood to deliver her final statement, the room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice strong and unwavering. "This case is about more than just one traffic stop. It's about accountability. It's about fairness. And it's about ensuring that those in positions of power are held to the same standards as everyone else." She paused, looking directly at the jury. "You've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimonies. And you've witnessed firsthand the pattern of behavior exhibited by the defendant, a pattern that cannot be ignored." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the jury, but with everyone in the room. By the time she finished speaking, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. This wasn't just a teenage girl fighting for justice. She was a force to be reckoned with, a brilliant, determined advocate who refused to back down no matter the odds. As the judge adjourned the court for the day, the girl returned to her seat, exhausted but exhilarated. Her grandmother reached over and squeezed her hand, tears glistening in her eyes. Mr. Carter gave her a proud nod, silently acknowledging the incredible work she had done. Across the room, the officer sat slumped in his chair, his confidence shattered. For the first time, he realized he had made a grave mistake underestimating her. The battle wasn't over yet. The jury still needed to deliberate. But one thing was certain: the tide had turned. And in that moment, the girl knew she had already won something far greater than a verdict. She had proven to herself and to the world that intelligence, determination, and courage could overcome even the toughest obstacles. As the trial moved into its final stages, the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Everyone could feel it: the weight of what was happening, the stakes involved, and the realization that this case wasn't just about one teenager versus a police officer. It had become something much bigger, a test of whether justice could truly prevail when faced with arrogance, prejudice, and systemic bias. The girl at the center of it all sat quietly beside Mr. Carter, her face calm but her mind racing. She knew the jury's decision would define not only her future, but also send a message to the entire community, and perhaps even beyond. Closing arguments are often seen as the most crucial part of any trial, and this one was no exception. Both sides were given the opportunity to summarize their cases, to leave a lasting impression on the jury before they retreated to deliberate. The prosecution went first, presenting their version of events in an attempt to paint the officer's actions as justified. They argued that he was simply doing his job, following protocol and responding to what he perceived as a threat. They downplayed the significance of the body camera footage, dismissing it as inconclusive, and urging the jury to focus instead on the officer's years of service and reputation. But when it came time for the defense to speak, the girl rose from her seat once again. This time there was no hesitation in her movements, no trace of nervousness. She walked slowly to the podium, her steps steady and deliberate. When she turned to face the jury, her expression was neither angry nor vengeful. It was resolute, filled with quiet strength. For a moment she let her gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of each juror individually. Then she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice clear and measured. "This case is not just about me. It's about fairness, it's about accountability, and it's about ensuring that power is never abused, no matter who holds it." Her words hung in the air, simple yet powerful, forcing everyone to sit up and listen. She started by revisiting the facts of the case, laying them out step by step. She reminded the jury of the traffic stop, how she had been cooperative from the very beginning, asking polite questions and trying to understand why she had been pulled over. She recounted the officer's dismissive tone, his false accusations, and the way he escalated the situation unnecessarily. Each detail was presented with precision, backed by evidence from the body camera footage and witness testimonies. Then she shifted gears, addressing the broader implications of the case. What happened to me that day wasn't an isolated incident, she explained. It was part of a pattern of behavior that has affected countless others in our community and across the country. People like me, young, black, and vulnerable, are often treated as guilty until proven innocent. We are judged not by our actions, but by assumptions based on stereotypes. Her voice softened slightly as she continued, adding a personal touch to her argument. I've always believed in the law. I've studied it, respected it, and dreamed of using it to make the world a fairer place. But laws mean nothing if they aren't applied equally. Justice means nothing if it isn't blind. And accountability means nothing if those in positions of authority aren't held to the same standards as everyone else. The jury watched her intently, some nodding along while others scribbled notes. Even the judge seemed unusually attentive, leaning forward slightly as if eager to hear more. The girl paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before delivering the knockout blow. "And let's talk about truth," she said, her tone firming once again. "Truth matters. Evidence matters. Yet throughout this trial we've seen attempts to twist the truth, to minimize the evidence, and to deflect responsibility. Why? Because admitting the truth requires courage. It requires humility. And it requires recognizing that none of us, not even those in uniform, are above reproach." She gestured toward the screen where the body camera footage had been played earlier. "That video doesn't lie. It shows exactly what happened that day. It shows an officer who acted disrespectfully, aggressively, and unprofessionally. And it shows a young person who did nothing wrong, but still found herself treated like a criminal." By now, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. The girl's closing argument wasn't just a legal presentation. It was a call to action, a plea for fairness and humanity. As she wrapped up her speech, her voice grew softer but no less impactful. "In the end, your verdict will decide more than just this case," she said, looking directly at the jury. "It will show whether we live in a society where justice is truly blind, or whether it bends under the weight of bias and privilege. I trust you to do what's right, not just for me but for everyone who believes in fairness and equality." When she finished speaking, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly while others whispered comments about how impressive she had been. Even the opposing counsel looked uneasy, realizing too late that they had underestimated her ability to connect with the jury on an emotional level. After both sides rested their cases, the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations. As the jurors filed out of the room, the girl returned to her seat, exhaling deeply. For the first time since the trial began, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her grandmother reached over and squeezed her hand tightly, offering silent support. Mr. Carter leaned in and whispered, "You did everything you could. Now it's in their hands." For hours, the jury debated behind closed doors. Outside the courthouse, reporters and supporters gathered, waiting anxiously for news. Inside, the girl tried to stay calm, though her mind kept replaying every moment of the trial. Had she done enough? Would the jury see through the lies and excuses? Or would the officer's badge and uniform overshadow the truth? Finally, after nearly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The foreperson stood up, holding the verdict form in trembling hands. The girl felt her heart pounding as the judge asked for the decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." The room erupted in gasps and cheers. The girl's grandmother burst into tears, hugging her tightly. Mr. Carter beamed with pride, clapping her on the back. Across the room, the officer slumped in, his chair, his face pale with shock. In that moment, it was clear. Justice had been served. But the victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless against injustice. As the girl stepped outside the courthouse later that day, surrounded by reporters and cheering supporters, she took a deep breath and smiled. This was only the beginning. The verdict sent shockwaves through the small town of Crestwood, rippling far beyond its borders. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly, turning what had started as a local incident into a national conversation about justice, accountability, and systemic bias. The image of the 16-year-old girl standing confidently outside the courthouse, her grandmother by her side, became a symbol of hope for many who felt marginalized or overlooked. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a triumph of determination, intelligence and courage over prejudice and arrogance. For the officer, however, the aftermath was devastating. His suspension from the police force was immediate, pending further investigation into his conduct. The department launched an internal review not only of his actions, but also of the broader practices within the force. Community leaders demanded reforms, calling for increased transparency and stricter consequences for officers found guilty of misconduct. The pressure mounted as protests erupted in Crestwood, with residents chanting slogans like, "Justice has no age," and "Accountability starts now." But while the town grappled with these changes, the girl at the center of it all remained focused on what mattered most, using this moment to create lasting change. In the days following the trial, she gave interviews to reporters, speaking eloquently about the importance of fairness and equality. She didn't shy away from discussing the challenges she faced during the case, how people doubted her because of her age, how the officer mocked her intelligence, and how she refused to let those obstacles stop her. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring countless young people across the country to believe in their own potential. One of the most surprising developments came when colleges and universities began reaching out to her. Prestigious institutions offered scholarships, eager to support her education and nurture her talent. Harvard Law School extended an invitation, praising her brilliance and commitment to justice. While the attention was overwhelming, she stayed grounded, crediting her success to her grandmother, Mr. Carter, and the community that rallied behind her. "This isn't just my win," she told reporters during one interview. "It's a win for everyone who believes in fairness and fights for it." Her grandmother, always her biggest supporter, stood proudly beside her during these moments. The two shared a bond stronger than ever, forged through years of hardship and strengthened by this incredible journey. Neighbors often stopped them on the street to express their admiration, some even tearing up as they recounted how the trial had inspired them to speak out against injustice in their own lives. For a family that had once kept a low profile, they were suddenly thrust into the spotlight, but neither complained. They knew this was an opportunity to make a difference. Meanwhile, the officer struggled to come to terms with the fallout. Suspended without pay and facing mounting legal fees, he found himself isolated. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone whose actions had sparked such widespread outrage. Job prospects dwindled. No law enforcement agency wanted to hire him after the scandal. He spent hours alone replaying the trial in his mind. The girl's piercing questions, the damning evidence, the look of disbelief on his face as the jury announced its verdict. Slowly, painfully, he began to realize the gravity of what he had done. In a surprising twist, he reached out to the girl months later. At first, she hesitated, unsure whether she wanted to engage with him after everything that had happened. But curiosity got the better of her, and she agreed to meet him under the condition that it remain private. The encounter took place in a quiet park, far from prying eyes. The officer looked older, worn down by guilt and regret. He apologized sincerely, admitting that he had been wrong, not just about her, but about so many others he had treated unfairly over the years. "I never saw you as more than a kid," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I thought I could intimidate you, push you around like I did with others, but you showed me something I'll never forget. You showed me what real strength looks like." The girl listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished speaking, she responded, calmly but firmly. "An apology is a start," she said. "But true redemption doesn't come from words, it comes from actions. If you're serious about changing, prove it. Work to make things right, not just for me, but for everyone you've hurt." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Though their meeting ended there, it marked a turning point for both of them. For the officer, it was the beginning of a long road toward self-reflection and reform. For the girl, it reinforced her belief in the power of forgiveness, but also in the Necessity of accountability. Back in Crestwood, the ripple effects of the trial continued to unfold. Inspired by her courage, residents formed committees to address issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. Local schools invited her to speak to students about perseverance and the importance of standing up for what's right. Even the Ayamesi Police Department underwent significant changes, implementing mandatory sensitivity training programs and creating citizen oversight boards to ensure greater transparency. As life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a monumental event, the girl turned her focus inward. She enrolled in Harvard Law School, where she quickly earned a reputation as one of the brightest students in her class. Professors marveled at her ability to analyze complex cases, while classmates admired her humility and willingness to help others. Despite the fame that followed her, she remained humble, always reminding herself of why she started this journey in the first place. Still, the experience left its mark on her. Late at night, when the dorms were quiet and the weight of the world seemed lighter, she would reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the officer's apology, wondering whether genuine change was possible. She thought about the supporters who cheered her on, giving her strength when she needed it most. And she thought about the countless others who still faced injustice every day, their voices unheard, their struggles unseen. It was during one of these reflective moments that she realized something important. Her fight was far from over. Winning the trial had been a victory, yes, but it was only one battle in a much larger war. There were still systems to dismantle, biases to challenge, and hearts and minds to change. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, she knew she couldn't and wouldn't give up. With renewed determination, she threw herself into her studies, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. She joined student organizations focused on civil rights, attended conferences on criminal justice reform, and volunteered her time helping underserved communities navigate the legal system. Every step she took brought her closer to her ultimate goal, becoming a lawyer who could fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Years later, as she graduated at the top of her class, she delivered a speech that echoed the same themes she had spoken about in that courtroom all those years ago. "Justice isn't something we achieve overnight," she told the audience. "It's a constant struggle, a relentless pursuit. But if we stand together, if we refuse to stay silent when we see wrongdoing, then we can build a world where fairness isn't the exception, but the rule." The crowd erupted in applause, but she barely noticed. Her gaze drifted to the back of the room where her grandmother sat smiling, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, surrounded by love and support, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the challenges that had shaped her, for the victories that had fueled her, and for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And as she walked off the stage, diploma in hand, she knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. Years flew by, and the once quiet town of Crestwood continued to evolve. The trial that had shaken its foundations became a turning point, a moment etched into the collective memory of everyone who lived there. Streets that were once tense with division began to feel lighter, as if the weight of unspoken grievances had finally been lifted. Conversations about fairness, accountability, and justice became more common, not just in town meetings, but at dinner tables, school assemblies, and even casual chats between neighbors. And at the heart of it all was the girl who refused to back down. After graduating from Harvard Law School, she returned to her hometown, not because she felt obligated, but because she believed Crestwood still had work left to do. She opened a small legal clinic in the heart of the community, offering free or low-cost services to those who couldn't afford representation. Her focus wasn't on high-profile cases or big payouts. Instead, she dedicated herself to helping ordinary people navigate complex systems that often seemed designed to keep them powerless. Whether it was fighting eviction notices, challenging unfair fines, or advocating for victims of discrimination, she approached each case with the same determination and compassion that had defined her journey from the start. Word spread quickly about the young lawyer who had taken on a police officer and won. People came from neighboring towns, seeking her advice and support. Some brought stories of injustice so heartbreaking they made her chest tighten with anger and sadness. Others shared tales of hope, inspired by how she had stood up for what was right. Each client reminded her why she had chosen this path, fueling her resolve to keep pushing forward. Her grandmother, now older and slower moving, remained her rock. Though retired, she spent hours volunteering at the clinic, greeting clients with warmth and making sure everyone felt welcome. "You've always been my greatest teacher," the girl often told her. "Without you, I wouldn't be here." Her grandmother would laugh, brushing off the compliment, but her pride was evident in every glance, every smile. The girl's impact extended beyond the courtroom. She became a voice for change, speaking at conferences, writing articles, and collaborating with advocacy groups across the country. Her story resonated deeply, especially with young people who saw themselves in her, kids who dreamed of breaking barriers but feared being dismissed because of their age, background, or circumstances. She traveled to schools, sharing her experiences and encouraging students to believe in their potential. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young, too inexperienced, or too different to make a difference," she'd say. "Your voice matters. Your actions matter, and no one can take that away from you." One day, while visiting a local high school, she met a shy teenager sitting in the back row. After her talk, the student approached her hesitantly, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled notes. "I want to be a lawyer," the teen admitted softly, "but I don't think I'm smart enough." The girl smiled, remembering how many times she had doubted herself along the way. "Being smart isn't about knowing everything," she replied. "It's about asking questions, staying curious, and never giving up, even when things get hard. You'll surprise yourself if you keep going." That interaction stayed with her long after the event ended. It reminded her that her work wasn't just about winning cases or changing policies. It was about inspiring others to dream bigger and bolder than they thought possible. Back in Crestwood, reforms within the police department continued to take shape. Sensitivity training programs became mandatory, and officers were required to undergo regular evaluations to ensure accountability. A citizen oversight board was established, giving residents a direct line of communication with law enforcement. While progress was slow and imperfect, the changes signaled a shift toward greater trust and cooperation between the community and those sworn to protect it. Even the officer whose life had intersected with hers in such a dramatic way found a new purpose. After months of soul-searching, he decided to leave law enforcement altogether, realizing he could no longer justify staying in a system he now saw as flawed. Instead, he began volunteering with organizations focused on restorative justice, working to repair the harm caused by years of misconduct. Though their paths rarely crossed, the girl occasionally heard updates about his efforts through mutual acquaintances. Each report gave her hope that redemption was possible, even for those who had strayed far from the right path. As the years passed, the girl grew into a woman whose presence commanded respect and admiration. Yet she remained humble, always quick to credit her success to the people who supported her along the way. "I didn't do this alone," she'd say during interviews. "My grandmother taught me resilience. Mr. Carter showed me the power of mentorship, and the community gave me the courage to keep going when I wanted to quit." This is their victory as much as mine. Her legacy wasn't confined to the walls of her legal clinic or the pages of newspapers. It lived in the lives she touched. The families reunited after wrongful separations, the individuals freed from unjust fines, the young people emboldened to pursue careers in law and activism. Every person she helped carried a piece of her story with them, passing it on like a torch. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her grandmother's house watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on how far she'd come, from a quiet teenager driving her grandmother's old sedan to a respected attorney fighting for justice on the national stage. Her journey had been anything but predictable. But looking back, she realized that every challenge, the dismissive comments, the doubters, the uphill battles, had shaped her into the person she was today. Her grandmother joined her on the porch, handing her a cup of tea. "You've done good, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but proud. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." The girl nodded, smiling. "I know, Grandma. But sometimes it feels like there's still so much to do, and there will always be more to do," her grandmother replied. "But that doesn't mean you have to carry the whole world on your shoulders. Let others help. Share the load." Her words lingered in the air, grounding her in a truth she often forgot. She didn't have to save everyone. What mattered was that she kept showing up, kept fighting, and kept believing in the possibility of a better tomorrow. As night fell, the stars emerged one by one, casting a gentle glow over the quiet town. The girl leaned back in her chair, feeling a rare sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply sit and breathe, to appreciate how far she'd come, without worrying about where she needed to go next, because deep down she knew something important. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required patience, perseverance, and unwavering faith in the power of doing what's right. And as long as she kept moving forward, step by step, she knew she'd continue to make a difference, not just in Crestwood, but wherever her path led. And so, the girl who once stood alone in a courtroom against a dismissive cop grew into a woman whose brilliance and bravery transformed an entire community. Her story served as a reminder that no obstacle is insurmountable, no dream too big, and no voice too small to spark meaningful change.